What if the story of our beginnings was never meant to be read as history at all, but as a warning? What if the tale you learned in school, polished and simplified until it felt safe, was only the last surviving fragment of a much older saga, one whispered by civilizations erased long before the first kingdoms rose? Imagine for a moment that humanity did not climb slowly from darkness into light, but rather fell from something greater, something guided, something watched. Because buried beneath the chronicles of kings and empires lies another narrative, one of beings who descended from the sky, of giants who walked among ordinary men, of guardians who broke their vows and paid a price older than any scripture. And when you trace the echoes through Sumer, through Babylon, through the deserts of the Near East, through the forgotten tablets and forbidden manuscripts, you begin to sense a pattern too deliberate to dismiss, too ancient to ignore. A pattern that suggests our origin story was rewritten, reshaped, sanitized, and that the truth was deliberately sealed away. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. It begins in the kind of silence that feels unnatural, the kind that settles over a landscape not because nothing is happening, but because something once did. Something powerful enough to leave the air, itself changed. When you picture the earliest days of humanity, you're taught to imagine wandering tribes, fragile shelters, crude tools shaped from stone and bone. But the deeper you go into the archaeological record, the more the timeline trembles. There are moments, scattered fragments, buried tablets, impossible inventions that do not fit the neat ladder of progress we memorized in classrooms. They hint at a sudden ignition, a leap that should have taken hundreds of generations but instead unfolded like a secret whispered into the ear of an unsuspecting world. And it is within that rupture between what we were and what we became that the first traces of an older story begin to surface, one that threads from the hills of ancient Mesopotamia straight into the myths of every culture touched by early human memory. The modern world often treats legend as metaphor, as if our ancestors lacked the ability to separate truth from symbol. But the more you study these civilizations, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, the more you realize they were far too precise to fabricate entire pantheons without some root in lived experience. Their tablets describe things with an unsettling specificity. The descent of celestial beings, the moment when those who came from the heavens stepped onto the earth, the shock waves that followed when they broke the boundaries between mortal and divine. These records do not sound like the dreamy abstraction of storytellers. They sound like the testimony of witnesses. And when you pair these ancient texts with the sudden appearance of writing, agriculture, astronomical calendars, and mathematics, systems that seem to emerge fully formed, you begin to wonder whether the human race truly invented its own future. Some say the story starts in Sumer, the cradle of civilization. But the Sumerians themselves insisted they were not the beginning. They claimed they were taught, guided, lifted by beings whose names still echo through the remnants of their language. Anunnaki, they called them. Not gods in the spiritual sense, but rulers, Scholars and skeptics dismiss this, but the tablets do not waver. These beings descended from above, walked in flesh, and altered the fate of the planet. And tucked between the lines of those cuneiform strokes is a warning that their arrival was not just a gift, but a disruption. Civilization was not a spark ignited by humanity alone. It was an intervention. When you look at the world through that lens, entire chapters of history change shape. You begin to understand why so many traditions speak of a golden age followed by a fall, why nearly every culture carries memories of forbidden unions between gods and mortals, why stories of giants, towering, massive, fearsome, appear in civilizations separated by oceans. These myths do not drift randomly across continents. They follow the same spine, the same sequence of events: the descent of watchers, the birth of hybrids, the rise of knowledge, the corruption of power, and finally, catastrophe. To see this pattern clearly, you must step back from the modern assumption that ancient people were naive. That assumption crumbles the moment you examine the craftsmanship of early civilizations. Consider Qumran, in the barren stone of the West Bank. In 1946, a group of teenage shepherds stumbled upon something that would unsettle the foundations of biblical scholarship: the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them lay fragments of a text long rumored, long dismissed, the Book of Enoch. Unlike the sanitized version of Genesis, Enoch's account is raw, unfiltered, unsettling. It describes beings of immense stature and brilliance descending onto Mount Hermon with a single purpose: to watch over humanity. But these watchers did not merely observe. They broke their own laws. They walked among human women. They created offspring that should never have existed. Those giants, the Nephilim, grew into beings of immense strength and violence, consuming the world like a wildfire. In Enoch's telling, the gods, angered by this contamination, unleashed judgment. And the flood, the one echoed in hundreds of cultures, was not simply a tragic natural disaster. It was a reset. Humanity, as it existed then, could not be allowed to continue. You hear versions of this story everywhere: Mesopotamian epics, Egyptian temple walls, early Greek poetry, Irish legend, Norse sagas, Native American oral histories. They speak of a vast world wiped clean, of a sky darkening, of waters rising in violence, of giants swept away in the chaos. When people separated by continents and millennia tell the same story, the truth is no longer a question of belief. It is a question of interpretation. And yet the Book of Enoch was censored, hidden, rejected when the biblical canon was assembled. Not because it lacked importance, but because it revealed too much. It described the gods not as distant, untouchable figures, but as beings who walked in flesh, who felt desire, who acted, who crashed into human history like thunder. It pulled back the curtain too far, exposing the machinery behind the origins of civilization. Even early church fathers accepted it as scripture, but time and politics buried it, leaving only whispers. Still, the echoes never disappeared. When you turn to Sumerian tablets, you find the same story wrapped in different names. Instead of watchers, you find Anunnaki. Instead of forbidden unions, you find descriptions of crossbreeding. Instead of giants, you find Nephilim. Instead of a flood brought by divine wrath, you find the destruction of earlier worlds. Enoch's world, in this sense, was not unique. It was a retelling of an even older truth that predates him by thousands of years. And that truth was simple. The gods who shaped early humanity were not supernatural abstractions. They were tangible. They intervened, and they left their fingerprints everywhere. Look at the ruins they left behind. In Lebanon, a single stone weighing more than 1,000 tons sits precisely cut, perfectly positioned, a task modern machinery struggles to replicate. In Egypt, the precision of the pyramids defies the limitations of copper tools. In South America, stones hundreds of tons in weight are stacked with joints so perfect a knife blade cannot slide between them. These are not the achievements of naive, primitive hands. They are the remnants of something else, something that understood the laws of matter and energy on a level that doesn't align with the historical timeline we were taught. Then there are the bones, or the absence of them. For centuries, explorers recorded encounters with tribes of gigantic people in Africa, the Middle East, Ireland, North America, even the Arctic. Skeletons were unearthed, measured, documented, then disappeared into private collections, museum basements, or simply lost. The pattern is as old as archaeology itself. The moment something threatens established chronology, it vanishes. Because to acknowledge giants is to validate Enoch. And to validate Enoch is to reopen the question of who, exactly, walked this planet before us. And that is the question that keeps resurfacing as you read deeper into these ancient texts. Enoch describes flying with beings of light, crossing the sky in chariots that burn with fire. Sumerian tablets depict star beings arriving in craft described as boats of heaven. Egyptian inscriptions show gods descending in radiant vessels. When stripped of poetic language, these accounts resemble something technological rather than mystical. Not divine miracles, machines. The more you examine these stories, the more they converge into a single narrative. There was a time when the heavens were not metaphorical, a time when beings from above did not send dreams or visions. They landed, they instructed, they bred, they ruled. And when everything collapsed, by rebellion, by corruption, by flood, they withdrew and left humanity to rebuild in the shadow of a forgotten age. But the most haunting detail is not that they came. It is that they left behind knowledge. Calendars based on astronomical cycles no unaided human eye could observe. Mathematics too advanced for early societies to invent. Stories of technology described as arsenal of the gods, the Eye of Ra, heavenly machines. These are not symbols. They are memories encoded into myth. And across every ancient culture, one theme remains constant. We were not alone in the beginning. We were shaped. When you stand in the desert wind of these old landscapes, Sumer, Akkad, Lebanon, the Nile, you feel something unmistakable. A weight in the air, a presence, as if the earth remembers what walked upon it long before the first historian dipped a reed into clay. And the more fragments we recover, the more the old world comes into focus. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Egyptian Book of the Heavenly Cow, the Temple of Edfu inscriptions, the Babylonian creation tablets. They all point toward a shared origin story, one that predates religion, predates empire, predates memory. It is not a tale of humans discovering the world. It is a tale of humans inheriting one. And if the ancients were telling the truth, if these beings existed, if their hybrid children walked the earth, if the flood was an engineered reset, then everything we think we know about the past is only the surface. A curated version of history, trimmed and reshaped to fit the comfort of later civilizations. Because the deeper truth, the one buried in clay jars and carved into stone, is far more unsettling. We were never the sole authors of our own genesis. Something older lit the fire. And that truth is now resurfacing, not in dusty libraries, but in deserts, in caves, in mountains, in forgotten ruins where the past refuses to stay silent. The earth is remembering. And so are we. There is a moment in every ancient narrative where the past begins to feel impossibly alive, as though the people who carved their stories into clay or stone were not simply documenting rituals or myths, but leaving behind warnings for those who would one day rediscover the fragments of their world. In the case of early Mesopotamia, this feeling intensifies as you move from the surface of archaeological discovery into the deeper layers that reveal not just the workings of early cities, but the fingerprints of something that doesn't fit neatly into the boundaries of human invention. And it is here, in this liminal space between memory and myth, that the story of humanity's transformation begins to unfold in a way that challenges everything we have ever been taught about the dawn of civilization. To understand the world that emerged after the Great Flood, the world of Sumer, Akkad, and later Babylon, you must first imagine a landscape reborn. Imagine plains washed clean by waters so powerful that they erased entire continents of memory. Imagine pockets of survivors gathering along rivers, trying to rebuild lives in the shadows of events they could not fully comprehend. The flood did not just reshape the physical world, it reshaped the world of meaning. Suddenly there were distinctions between the old beings, the Watchers, the giants, the sky gods, and the new humanity that began to spread across the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates. And within the memories of those early survivors was a truth too large to contain in simple stories, a truth preserved through a blend of fear, reverence, and awe. According to the Sumerians, their civilization was not the first. They spoke repeatedly of earlier ages, of kings who ruled for thousands of years before the waters came, of beings who descended not from earthly blood, but from celestial origins. These were the ones they called the Anunnaki, and they were not distant deities in the way later mythology has sanitized them. They were present, tangible, powerful. Their influence was woven into the fabric of daily life, not as metaphors, but as rulers, lawmakers, teachers, and sometimes destroyers. The Sumerians recorded their interactions with these beings the way modern scribes might document the reign of a king. Factually, chronologically, with a precision that makes it difficult to dismiss as fantasy. The earliest lists of Sumerian rulers reflect this in eerie detail. They speak of kings who reigned for absurd lengths of time. 10,000 years, 8,000 years, entire lifetimes that defy human biology. Modern scholars dismiss these numbers as symbolic, but to the Sumerians they were literal. And when you pair these accounts with the stories from Enoch, from Egypt, from Greece, from India, the pattern becomes unmistakable. These gods lived for ages because they were not like us, but their presence on earth was not without turmoil. The Sumerians recorded that the Anunnaki fought among themselves, divided into factions, and made decisions that shaped the fate of entire populations. Some treated humanity with a measure of compassion. Others viewed humans as tools, workers, even experiments. And the more you read these ancient accounts, the clearer it becomes that the relationship between the Anunnaki and early humans was far more complex than worship alone. It was an entanglement of power, biology, and destiny. One of the most striking elements of these texts is the description of knowledge transfer, how writing, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture emerged seemingly overnight. The Sumerians did not claim to have invented these advancements. They attributed them directly to the gods. The Me, a collection of knowledge and divine ordinances, was said to have been gifted to humanity. And the gods who bestowed these systems did not do so out of charity. They did so because they needed humanity to evolve quickly. They needed workers, cities, institutions. And the more organized humanity became, the more the gods could shape the world according to their own designs. This creates an unsettling revelation that humanity's leap from wandering tribes to complex city-states was not a natural progression. It was guided, accelerated, engineered. As you move deeper into the Sumerian texts, especially those discovered at Nippur and Nineveh, this engineered evolution becomes clearer. According to the tablets, humanity began as a hybrid. Early humans were not merely the product of natural selection, but of deliberate genetic manipulation. The texts describe a moment when the lesser gods, the Igigi, rebelled against their labor, refusing to continue mining and maintaining the infrastructure the Anunnaki had established. In response, a plan was formed: create a new race, a race capable of bearing the load, a race intelligent enough to follow commands, but not powerful enough to challenge their creators. And so the Anunnaki turned to Enki, the god of wisdom, who combined their genetic essence with that of early hominids, the first humans, the Adamu. Not Adam in the biblical sense, but the prototype of humanity as a working species. The Sumerian texts do not shy away from this idea. They state it directly, as if the truth was so normal to them that it required no poetic camouflage. Once humans began to multiply and spread through the land, the dynamic shifted. Cities flourished, temples rose, agriculture expanded, and soon the new race became indispensable. But this growth brought unintended consequences. Humans became aware, curious, competent, and some among the gods saw potential in humanity that others feared. The result was a series of tensions that ripple through every ancient legend: the gods who wanted to elevate humanity and the gods who wanted to suppress them. This tension culminates in a series of events recorded not only in Sumer, but also echoed in the Book of Enoch. The Watchers descending upon Mount Hermon, taking human women as partners, creating offspring who became the giants, Nephilim, Anakim, Rephaim, Titans, depending on the culture that preserved the memory. These beings were described as immense, brilliant, terrifying, not just in size but in presence. Their existence disrupted the balance. Humanity was never meant to carry such mixed bloodlines. This is the point at which the gods became divided in a way that would shape the future of the entire world. Enki, the one who had engineered humanity, wished to protect them. His brother Enlil saw humanity as a failed experiment, corrupted beyond repair. And in the mythological language of the tablets, Enlil's frustration reaches a peak. He decides that the only solution is to wipe the slate clean, a destruction so complete that even the memory of the former age would be erased. The flood. Not a sudden rainfall or a simple river swelling, but a cosmic event triggered with purpose. The tablets describe the skies darkening, winds roaring, waters rising in violence. And while humanity perished, the gods watched from above in what the texts describe as boats of heaven. Some mourned, some celebrated, but all understood that the world would never return to what it had been. Only one man, Ziusudra, known later as Utnapishtim, and eventually transformed into the biblical Noah, was warned. Not because the gods as a whole wished to save humanity, but because Enki refused to let the race he guided be erased entirely. After the flood, the world entered what the Sumerians call a new age, an age marked by shorter lifespans, diminished knowledge, and a profound disconnect between humans and their former gods. The beings who once walked openly now retreated into the background. Some vanished, some remained only as distant rulers, some became spectral presences in temples and rituals, and humanity, left to rebuild, struggled to interpret what had happened. They carried fragments of memory, stories of giants, of flying craft, of cities lit by impossible technologies. These fragments became myths, then legends, then religious texts as generations passed. But traces of the earlier world remained, in stone, in symbolism, in architecture. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, for example, were said to be modeled after the heavenly realms, stairways not to heaven in a spiritual sense, but to the landing platforms of the gods. Egyptian pyramids aligned with the stars in ways that suggested ancient astronomical precision impossible for a civilization supposedly just emerging from primitive conditions. South American temples mirrored the constellations. The Indus Valley carried symbols found nowhere else on Earth, yet somehow connected to Sumerian iconography. And then there were the megalithic sites, Baalbek's enormous stones, the platform beneath the Roman ruins, weighing more than 1,000 tons and showing no signs of being dragged or lifted by human hands. The Sphinx of Giza, showing erosion patterns that indicate it survived multiple phases of climate long before dynastic Egypt rose. The ruins of Göbekli Tepe, predating agriculture itself, built with a complexity that should not exist for another 6,000 years. Every one of these structures whispers the same underlying question. How did early humans accomplish feats that still challenge modern engineering? The answer becomes clearer when you return to the Sumerian claim. They didn't. They inherited a world already shaped by beings far beyond them. A world whose technologies they could not fully comprehend, but whose remnants they attempted to preserve. The old world was not just advanced. It was supernatural in the only way ancient people could describe technology they did not understand. Flying craft became chariots of fire, energy weapons became divine eyes, communication devices became magical birds that carried messages across the sky. And the more you translate the metaphors, the more the old world begins to resemble something technological rather than mystical. As humanity rebuilt itself after the flood, the gods eventually withdrew. Some left to return to their home, described as a distant celestial realm. Others remained but lost the ability, or the desire, to interact openly. Their bloodlines, however, did not vanish. Legends tell of kings descended from gods, of heroes born from divine unions, of rulers possessing knowledge and strength beyond mortal limits. Gilgamesh, for example, was said to be 2/3 divine. Hercules was the son of Zeus. The Egyptian pharaohs were considered literal descendants of the gods. These claims are not metaphorical. They are relics of a hybrid age that followed the catastrophe. Even the biblical story of David and Goliath hints at this. Goliath was not an anomaly. He was a surviving remnant of the Nephilim. Entire tribes of giants existed in the ancient Near East, their presence documented not just in scripture, but in the oral traditions of surrounding cultures. And while physical evidence has been repeatedly suppressed or ignored, accounts of their existence appear with startling frequency throughout early exploration. What makes this even more intriguing is the global nature of these memories. Native American tribes speak of red-haired giants. Norse mythology recounts frost giants. Celtic legends speak of Fomorians. Africa remembers the Jinn, beings of immense size and power. Polynesia has stories of enormous early inhabitants. In nearly every corner of the world, long before cross-continental travel, humanity carried memories of beings too large to be dismissed as coincidences. As the millennia passed and civilizations rose and fell, the truth behind these stories faded into the background. The Anunnaki were transformed into distant gods. The Watchers became angels or demons. The giants became characters in morality tales. And the engineered origins of humanity were obscured by layers of interpretation, translation, and political control. Yet certain texts, those not fully absorbed into mainstream religion, retained specific details that betray their true origins. The Book of Enoch describes Enoch's journey into the heavens with such technical clarity that it resembles a description of flight, not mystical ascension. Egyptian temple inscriptions depict gods using devices that look uncannily like electrical instruments. Sumerian tablets detail astronomical bodies that should not have been visible to the naked eye. Babylonian star maps show planets in positions not known to ancient observers. These are not the inventions of unsophisticated storytellers. They are the records of a civilization trying to preserve what little they understood of a world built by beings far older and more advanced than themselves. And the farther back you go, the more the lines blur between history, mythology, and the possibility of forgotten epochs. In India's Vedic texts, wars are described with weapons that radiate heat brighter than 1,000 suns. In the Americas, carvings depict figures descending from the sky. In Africa, stories of the Nomo, beings from the Sirius system, match astronomical knowledge the Dogon could not have acquired through observation. These are independent memories of contact, echoing across continents. All of this points to a singular conclusion, that the flood did not merely reset the physical world, it reset the narrative. Humanity was reduced to fragments of memory scattered across the globe, each carrying a piece of a puzzle that would only make sense when those fragments were reunited thousands of years later. And now, as we uncover these tablets, decode these symbols, translate these ancient scripts, and compare their stories side by side, we are beginning to reconstruct a timeline that looks nothing like the one printed in history books. A timeline where humanity did not rise alone. A timeline where gods walked among mortals, where giants shaped landscapes, where technology was passed down like forbidden fire. And somewhere within that forgotten age lies the origin of everything we call civilization. In the aftermath of the Great Reset, the flood that erased almost everything humanity once knew, the world did not return to silence. Instead, it awoke into an age of slow reconstruction, where the memories of what came before flickered like fading torches in the darkness. In the scattered pockets of survivors who'd crawled onto mountaintops or clung to drifting fragments of the old world, a strange truth lingered, whispered across generations. that the beings who once walked openly among humans had not vanished entirely. They had retreated, withdrawn into realms unseen, leaving behind remnants of knowledge, fragments of technology, and bloodlines that would ripple through the next age of human civilization. And as humanity struggled to rebuild itself, those remnants, those scattered embers of an ancient fire, would ignite new centers of power, new myths, and new echoes of the world that had drowned beneath the waves. It is here, in this liminal space between devastation and emergence, that the story of the seven sages begins. Figures who appear in nearly every ancient mythos across continents, separated by oceans, languages, and time. They are called the Apkallu in Sumer, the seven sages in Babylon, the seven priests of Thoth in Egypt, the Saptarishi in India, and the seven great teachers in Mesoamerican tradition. Their names vary, but their purpose remains strangely constant. They arrive after catastrophe, bringing knowledge, rebuilding order, re-establishing civilization. Their presence is so synchronized across the globe that it defies coincidence. These are not isolated stories of different cultures inventing similar characters. These are memories. Memories of real beings who appeared in multiple places at the dawn of humanity's second age. According to the texts of ancient Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were semi-divine beings sent by the gods to restore what had been lost. They emerged when the waters receded, guiding the earliest post-flood kings, teaching them agriculture, writing, healing, astronomy, architecture. They were described as hybrids, part human, part divine, sometimes depicted with fish bodies or bird-like forms as symbolic remnants of their celestial nature. But symbolism alone cannot explain their uncanny resemblance across continents. In India, the Saptarishi are described as star-born teachers descending from the heavens. In Egypt, Thoth is accompanied by 7 priest scholars entrusted with the secrets of creation. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl appears with 6 companions, spreading knowledge of calendars and engineering. In each tradition, the number remains 7, and in each tradition, their arrival marks the rebirth of civilization. This raises an unsettling possibility that the beings who returned, or perhaps survived after the flood, were not gods in the metaphysical sense, but literal remnants of the Anunnaki, or Watchers, those who refused to abandon Earth during its destruction. They became the guardians of the New World, shaping early societies with remnants of forgotten technologies and memories of the lost age. And humanity, rising from the brink of extinction, enshrined them in myth not because they misunderstood what they were, but because they lacked the vocabulary to describe their nature. Much of what we know about these sages comes from the inscriptions found in the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, where the walls speak in a voice so ancient that it predates the dynasties themselves. The inscriptions describe a primordial island, Zep Tepi, the first time, where the gods dwelled before the flood. This island, said to be located off the African coast, was destroyed by rising waters. Only a few survivors remained, fleeing by boat to the Nile Valley. There they rebuilt, guided by the 7 divine beings who carried the memories of the old world. The Egyptians called them the Builders. They were said to have erected the first temples, laid out the first cities, and aligned their structures with the stars according to knowledge passed down from their celestial origins. One of the most striking aspects of these inscriptions is their consistency with accounts from other civilizations. The idea of a sunken homeland, of knowledge-bearers fleeing disaster, appears everywhere. Plato spoke of Atlantis, an advanced island civilization that vanished beneath the sea. The Dogon people of West Africa describe the Nomo, amphibious beings from the Sirius system, who came to Earth after a cosmic catastrophe. Polynesian legends tell of great canoes bringing wisdom-bearers from a land swallowed by the ocean. And in Central America, the Maya recount the destruction of an ancient continent and the arrival of 7 sages from across the water. These stories do not behave like myths. They behave like converging memories of a real event, a global cataclysm witnessed by multiple cultures whose descendants encoded it in ritual and song. The Temple of Edfu goes further. It describes not just the destruction of the primordial island, but the rebuilding. The 7 sages travel along the Nile, stopping at sacred hills and rising mounds, places believed to have remained above the floodwaters. There they construct temples designed to preserve the blueprint of the world that came before. These temples were not places of worship in the modern sense. They were information systems, libraries, repositories of knowledge concealed in stone, geometry, and astronomical alignment. The Sumerians did the same. The Mayans did the same. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site thousands of years older than agriculture, did the same. Everywhere these sages went, they left behind structures that outlived their students. And yet, as civilizations rose from the mud of the flood, something strange happened. Instead of treating these structures as engineering marvels or remnants of advanced knowledge, later cultures mythologized them. They attributed the feats of their earliest ancestors to gods. They forgot, or were made to forget, that these achievements had been inherited rather than invented. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid was no longer seen as a monument built according to celestial maps, but as a tomb for a king, despite the fact that no mummy was ever found inside. In Sumer, the ziggurats became stairways to heaven rather than landing platforms for celestial craft. The farther humanity moved from the flood, the more the story shifted from memory to metaphor. But below the metaphors, the truth still breathes. Consider the Egyptian god Thoth, often depicted with the head of an ibis. The ibis was not chosen for aesthetic reasons. It was a symbol of knowledge, of writing, of celestial mathematics. Thoth was said to have come to Earth aboard a ship of light. He carried with him objects described as magical by ancient scribes, a mirror that could see across great distances, a bird-like device that could carry messages through the air, and tablets inscribed with codes of creation. To modern eyes, these sound like technological devices, telescopes, communication tools, encoded archives. But in the vocabulary of a newly rebuilt world, they could only be described as magic. And here lies the subtle twist. Thoth was often identified not just as a god, but as Enoch, the same Enoch who in other traditions was taken to the heavens in a chariot of fire, shown the secrets of creation, and returned with instructions for humanity. Different names, same figure. This connection between Thoth and Enoch is not a fringe interpretation. Ancient Greek scholars equated Thoth with Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, the keeper of hidden wisdom. Hermetic tradition claims that this figure possessed knowledge from a civilization older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than the flood itself. and according to some ancient sources, this knowledge was preserved in the emerald tablets, texts said to contain the blueprint for human evolution and cosmic order. Whether these tablets were physical objects or symbolic representations of a deeper technology is still debated, but their existence as a concept underscores a critical truth: that humanity's earliest teachers were not mortal. The Egyptians believed the gods had once walked among them, teaching them the arts of life. But they also believed that one day the gods would leave, and when they did, Egypt would fall into darkness. One particular prophecy, attributed to Thoth, describes a future time when the sacred temples would crumble, when foreign rulers would take control, when the gods' presence would vanish from the land. And in chilling detail, it states that the departure of the gods would signal the end of truth, wisdom, and harmony. It would mark the moment when humanity began to forget its origins. This prophecy reads today like a lamentation of a world slipping into amnesia, and in many ways, that is exactly what happened. After millennia of guidance, humanity entered an age where divine beings no longer appeared openly. Whether they left Earth entirely or simply withdrew into realms hidden from ordinary perception is unknown. But their absence shifted everything. Kings claimed divine descent without understanding what that truly meant. Priests guarded rituals whose meanings they no longer knew. Temples became monuments instead of repositories. And civilizations that once collaborated with celestial teachers became increasingly human, increasingly fallible, increasingly separated from the knowledge that originally shaped them. Yet the memory of the sages lingered, encoded in symbols, myths, and architectural alignments. For example, the constellation Orion appears repeatedly in ancient art, often as a representation of the god's home. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion's belt. The Osiris myth describes a celestial ascent through Orion. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were linked to the Pleiades and Sirius. In the Dogon tradition, the Nommo came from Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, yet somehow known to the tribe long before telescopes. These are not coincidences. They are clues, scattered hints that Earth was once part of a larger story written in the sky. Many ancient cities were built according to stellar blueprints. Teotihuacan mirrors the alignment of celestial bodies. The Angkor temples reflect the Draco constellation as it appeared 12,000 years ago. Stonehenge tracks the movements of the sun and moon with a precision that defies the idea of primitive engineering. These patterns suggest that the earliest post-flood civilizations were not simply restarting from scratch. They were reconstructing an inherited memory of the world that came before. And that memory was not only astronomical, it was deeply technological. One of the most enigmatic aspects of ancient civilization is the repeated mention of divine weapons and heavenly machines. The Egyptians spoke of the Eye of Ra, a device capable of unleashing destruction described in terms strikingly similar to modern energy weapons. The Vedic texts of India describe flying craft called vimanas that moved with glowing heat and produced thunderous noise. The Hebrews spoke of chariots of fire that carried prophets across the sky. The Greeks told of ambrosia and ichor, substances with properties resembling advanced biological technologies. These accounts come from cultures separated by oceans, yet they describe the same kinds of devices through the lens of limited vocabulary. If you strip away the mythic language, what remains is an uncanny consistency. The gods possessed machines. The gods possessed weapons. The gods possessed knowledge of energy, astronomy, and biology that humanity would not rediscover for millennia. This brings us to the question at the heart of the Forgotten Age. Who were the gods? The Sumerians tell us they were beings who came from a celestial realm. The Egyptians say they descended in luminous ships. The Hebrews call them angels. The Greeks call them titans. The Hindus call them devas. The Dogon call them Nomo. The Maya call them the Shining Ones. But their characteristics remain constant: tall, powerful, long-lived, radiant, technologically advanced, and deeply entangled in the fate of humanity. As the post-flood civilizations expanded, the gods' direct influence diminished, but their legacy did not. Their hybrid bloodlines continued in the ruling classes. Their structures became the foundations of cities. Their laws shaped the earliest systems of governance. Their astronomical knowledge became the backbone of calendars, and their stories became the sacred texts of religions that would dominate the next stage of human history. But something else lingered, something more elusive, more ominous, a sense that the gods' departure was not final, that they had stepped away, but not forever. Many ancient traditions speak of cycles, long celestial cycles in which the gods return at certain astronomical alignments. The Sumerians describe a long orbit of a distant celestial body associated with the Anunnaki. The Egyptians speak of recurring ages marked by the rising and falling of Osiris. The Maya calculated vast time cycles that culminate in periods of renewal. These cycles suggest that humanity's forgotten age was not just a one-time event, but part of a larger rhythm, one that repeats across millennia. As we move deeper into the stories of the ancient world, into the temples, the tablets, the star maps, the hidden inscriptions, the feeling grows stronger that we are not looking at isolated myths. We are looking at a fractured memory of a real history, a history where gods walked among people, where giants shaped landscapes, where sages rebuilt cities after cataclysm, a history erased not by accident, but by necessity. A history waiting to resurface in the modern world, piece by piece, as we uncover the remnants of civilizations far older than we ever imagined. The Forgotten Age is not a mythic dream. It is a buried chapter of our species, and the more we decode its fragments, the clearer the picture becomes. We did not rise from darkness into light. We rose from the ruins of a world built by beings who left their imprint on everything we are. Long before the first dynasties carved their names into stone, before the early kings of Sumer raised their ziggurats, before Egypt's deserts were scattered with monuments that still defy explanation, there existed a world whose complexity modern history refuses to acknowledge. Its remnants lie beneath layers of sediment and myth, hidden in half-buried cities and drowned coastlines, hinted at in texts dismissed as allegory. But when you gather these fragments, those scattered, stubborn pieces of a forgotten past, you begin to see the outline of a civilization not merely ancient, but primordial. A civilization guided, corrected, and at times dominated by beings who were not human. And as you move deeper into the strata of their influence, the impression becomes undeniable. Our world as we know it was built on the ruins of something older and infinitely stranger. To understand this world, you must first understand the concept that dominated the minds of ancient peoples. The idea that knowledge was not discovered, but bestowed. Everywhere you look in the early post-flood civilizations, you find the same pattern. Agriculture does not evolve gradually. It appears fully developed. Writing does not emerge from crude pictographs. It arrives as cuneiform, already capable of capturing complex metaphysical ideas. Astronomy is not a collection of simple observations. It is a system so precise that modern researchers still struggle to understand how ancient builders calculated alignments with stars invisible to the naked eye. These were not the results of trial and error. These were the artifacts of inheritance. The question that has haunted archaeologists for centuries is simple. Inherited from whom? This is where the story turns back toward the beings described in ancient texts, the Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the Netjeru of Egypt, the Devas of India, the Watchers of the Hebrew traditions. Different names, different contexts, but common characteristics. Beings who arrived from above, who lived for extraordinary durations, who possessed knowledge far beyond what early humans could have developed, and who intervened directly in human affairs. Their presence forms the backbone of prehistory, not as poetic metaphor, but as the plain truth encoded in mythic language. One of the most revealing clues about this forgotten age lies in the nature of the flood itself. In modern retellings, the flood is portrayed as a moral lesson, a spiritual cleansing. But in the oldest versions, the Sumerian, the Akkadian, the Babylonian, the flood is described as a controlled event. A judgment, yes, but also a mechanism. Something triggered by the gods themselves. And when the waters rose, the celestial beings who had shaped early humanity did not perish. They watched from above, from vehicles described as boats of the heavens, observing as the world reset. This concept, repeated across cultures, suggests cataclysm not as accident, but as intervention. Once the waters receded, the gods stepped in again, choosing specific individuals to rebuild the world. This is where the 7 sages reappear, those enigmatic figures who emerge after catastrophe with the singular goal of re-establishing civilization. But their mission was not altruistic. It was strategic. The world had been purged of hybrid lineages and corrupt bloodlines. The gods needed humanity, but humanity needed order. And so the sages became the stewards of the new age. This period, what we might call the Reconstruction epoch, is when the great civilizations of antiquity first took shape. Not slowly over thousands of years, but rapidly, almost as if following a blueprint. And perhaps they were. The Temple of Edfu inscriptions describe the sages as builders who reconstructed sanctuaries according to plans preserved from the first time, Zep Tepi. The Sumerians speak of the Apkallu teaching kings how to shape cities in the shadow of the heavenly tablets. The Indians describe the Saptarishi bringing cosmic knowledge encoded in symbols and rituals. The Mesoamericans recount the 7 travelers from the East who instructed their ancestors in astronomy and city planning. These are not metaphors. They are structural plans disguised in story. One of the greatest mysteries of this epoch is how these societies achieved such instantaneous sophistication. Consider the sudden appearance of megalithic architecture across the world. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, dated to more than 11,000 years old, reveal engineering far beyond what hunter-gatherers should have been capable of. Massive T-shaped pillars carved with animals, arranged in perfect circles, aligned to astronomical events. Tools from this era are primitive, yet the stonework is precise. It is as if the knowledge came first, and the tools were merely improvised to express it. Likewise, in South America, sites like Sacsayhuaman contain stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted so tightly that even a razor blade cannot slip between them. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid's alignment and geometry defy the limits of simple copper chisels and wooden sledges. The conventional explanation that ancient peoples developed these skills in a vacuum is insufficient. What makes more sense is the version preserved in ancient texts, that these civilizations inherited the knowledge from beings who possessed it long before the flood. Beings who returned in the aftermath, not as overlords, but as architects of the new human world. But their influence was not limited to construction. It permeated every aspect of early society, shaping law, religion, lineage, and power. In Sumer, kingship was said to have descended from heaven. Not metaphorically. The word me in Sumerian refers to divine ordinances that were physically delivered to humanity. The first kings were chosen not by human consensus, but by divine decree. Their bloodlines, often traced back to gods, set them apart as intermediaries between humanity and the celestial realm. This pattern repeats everywhere. Egyptian pharaohs claimed direct descent from Ra or Osiris. Indian kings traced lineage to solar and lunar dynasties governed by the gods. Chinese emperors spoke of the mandate of heaven. European mythologies linked their earliest rulers to giants, gods, or sky beings. The world's earliest power structures were not simply political, they were genetic legacies. Which brings us to the most controversial element of this forgotten age, the hybridization of early humans with celestial beings. Nearly every ancient culture preserves stories of unions between gods and mortals. The Nephilim of the Hebrew Bible, the Titans and demigods of Greece, the Devas and Asuras who mingled with humans in Sanskrit epics, the Anakim, Rephaim, and Emim described in Canaanite and Israelite texts, the red-haired giants recorded by Native American tribes, the Fomorians of Ireland. The stories are not vague. They are explicit. Beings of immense power and size, born from forbidden unions whose existence destabilized the world. Many historians dismiss these stories as fantastical embellishments, but the archaeological evidence is harder to ignore. Accounts of giant skeletons, often between 8 and 12 feet tall, were common in the 19th and early 20th centuries, recorded in newspapers, academic journals, and explorers' logs. Many of these discoveries vanished into private collections or museums' restricted archives. In Egypt, a tomb near Nagada reportedly contained multiple giant skeletons measuring over 9 feet. In Sardinia, a series of graves were unearthed containing enormous bones, only to be sealed off by authorities. In North America, the Smithsonian allegedly collected dozens of skeletons reported by early settlers, skeletons that later disappeared from public record. Whether by suppression or neglect, the physical evidence of these beings has been systematically erased. Yet the mythological record remains intact. And when you compare these myths across cultures, a pattern emerges. Giants were not merely antagonists. They were rulers, builders, warriors, and often the offspring of gods. They represent a transitional stage in humanity's evolution, a stage that the gods themselves deemed unacceptable. Their destruction, often linked to the flood, was part of the world's reset. When the waters receded, the gods prevented their return by establishing strict boundaries between their realm and the human world. Angels no longer lived among people. Gods no longer intermingled with mortals. The hybrid age was over, but traces of this age endured in the lineages of kings. Gilgamesh, for example, was described as 2/3 divine. His feats defy human limits, slaying monstrous beings, traversing cosmic realms, encountering immortals. He embodies the last flicker of a hybrid world fading into memory. Hercules, in Greek myth, similarly bridges the mortal and divine. His strength is unnatural, his labors are otherworldly, he is a remnant, an echo of the Nephilim. Across cultures, these demigods appear as transitional figures, beings born into a world struggling to redefine its relationship with the divine. This transition was not peaceful. As humanity grew in number and ambition, tensions rose between the gods. Enlil, one of the most powerful Anunnaki, viewed humanity as a threat. Enki, his brother, saw humanity as a creation worth preserving. Their rivalry shaped the post-flood world, influencing early kingship, city formation, and technological development. Enki taught humans how to irrigate fields, build cities, and develop laws. Enlil tried to curtail human autonomy, imposing restrictions and catastrophes. This tension resembles the dualistic frameworks found in later religions, good versus evil, creator versus destroyer. But in its original form, it is far more nuanced. Both gods were acting from self-preservation. Humanity was the battleground. Over time, certain humans gained access to the gods' knowledge. Priests, scribes, and kings guarded rituals and technologies that the general population could not comprehend. In Egypt, this knowledge was codified in the temples. In Sumer, it was etched into tablets. In India, it was preserved in chants and hymns. But even as knowledge was passed down, its meaning slowly eroded. Symbols once used to describe machines or celestial phenomena became spiritual metaphors. Histories became myths. Myths became legends. And the truth was buried beneath layers of interpretation. Yet fragments of ancient technology still appear in the archaeological record. In Baghdad, a set of clay jars with copper and iron rods were discovered, objects that, when reconstructed, function as primitive batteries. In Egypt, carvings at Dendera resemble light bulbs, complete with electrical filaments. In Colombia, small golden artifacts look remarkably like aircraft, capable of aerodynamic lift when tested in wind tunnels. These anomalies suggest a world where remnants of divine technology lingered long enough for humans to attempt replication. But without the full knowledge of the gods, these replications remained crude, symbolic, or misunderstood. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of ancient technological memory lies in the star maps. The Sumerians accurately described the outer planets thousands of years before the invention of telescopes. The Dogon tribe of Meli knew of Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye. Egyptian temples align with constellations in ways that reflect sky positions 12,000 years old. Why would early civilizations possess such advanced astronomical knowledge unless it had been preserved from a time when celestial beings interacted with Earth? This brings us to the great question that overshadows the forgotten age. Did the gods leave? Ancient texts suggest they did, but not uniformly. Some left Earth entirely, returning to their celestial home. Others retreated into hidden realms, described as mountains of the gods, underworlds, or stargates. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were said to dwell in the distant heavens and the deep earth. In Egypt, gods traveled through the Duat, a parallel realm. In India, the Devas inhabited higher dimensions of existence. These descriptions may be mythic interpretations of advanced technology or multidimensional travel. Whatever the case, the gods did not die. They withdrew. Their departure left humanity in a peculiar state, advanced enough to build cities and monuments, yet disconnected from the source of their knowledge. This disconnection created a vacuum. For the first time, humanity had to navigate the world without divine oversight. And it is here, in this vacuum, that history as we know it begins. Dynasties rising and falling, wars fought for territory, religions forming around fading memories of the gods, and empires expanding across continents. But the forgotten age still lived beneath the surface. Priests whispered of cosmic cycles. Kings traced their lineage to celestial ancestors. Hermetic texts preserved fragments of pre-flood wisdom. Mysteries schools guarded symbols whose meanings were known only to initiates, and megalithic sites continued to draw power from the alignment of stars, as if acting as beacons for those who once walked the earth. Modern history treats these mysteries as curiosities, but when seen together, they reveal a profound truth. The Forgotten Age is not merely a chapter of prehistory. It is the foundation upon which all later civilizations were built. And as we uncover more of its remnants, through archaeology, myth, and science, we inch closer to understanding what the ancients always knew, that we are a species shaped not just by evolution, but by intervention, not just by nature, but by contact. The Forgotten Age is not gone. It is etched into stone, encoded in legend, and written in the stars. And the more we learn, the more the boundaries between myth and memory begin to dissolve. In the ancient world, truth did not vanish all at once. It dissolved slowly, like a monument worn down by centuries of wind, its outlines still recognizable, but its finer details lost to erosion. What survived became the myths, symbols, and rituals of early civilizations, fragments of a memory too immense to preserve intact. And as the generations passed, the beings who once walked openly among humans receded deeper into legend. Yet the influence of those beings, the architects of the Forgotten Age, remained embedded in the world's most enduring mysteries. Their fingerprints appear in the rise of empires, the sacred geometries etched into temple floors, the alignments of monuments with distant stars, and the sudden emergence of philosophies that feel far too sophisticated for the eras in which they appeared. It is within these subtle yet persistent echoes that we find the next chapter of humanity's hidden history. A chapter defined not by open contact with celestial beings, but by the human struggle to interpret, wield, and sometimes weaponize the remnants of divine knowledge. Across the early post-flood civilizations, a new phenomenon began to emerge, one that would shape the future of the human species in ways both enlightening and catastrophic. This phenomenon was the rise of secret knowledge, teachings reserved for kings, priests, or initiates, guarded jealously by those who understood its value. While the general population farmed, traded, and worshipped without question, select groups preserved advanced ideas inherited from the sages and gods of the Forgotten Age. These ideas concerned astronomy, mathematics, medicine, architecture, and the movements of celestial bodies. But they also included deeper truths about humanity's origins, about cosmic cycles, and about the invisible forces believed to govern the universe. You see the roots of these hidden traditions clearly in Egypt. The priesthood of Heliopolis, for instance, possessed a cosmology far more complex than anything known in later Greek or Roman times. Their teachings described the universe as a series of emanations, each connected to a divine principle. To them, creation was not a singular event, but an ongoing process, a flow of energy from the realm of the gods into the material world. These ideas were encoded in texts like the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, which survive as some of the oldest religious writings in the world. But their meanings are often obscured because they were written not for the general public, but for initiates who already understood the underlying metaphysics. Similarly, in Sumer and Babylon, the priest scholars known as the Ummanu preserved astronomical knowledge that seems impossible for their era. They tracked planets with such precision that modern scientists remain puzzled by their accuracy. They understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, thousands of years before Greek astronomers supposedly discovered it. They divided the sky into zones that correspond exactly to modern constellations. This knowledge would later shape the zodiac and influence cultures across Asia, Africa, and Europe. But to the Babylonians, these celestial patterns were more than scientific data. They were part of a cosmic message, a timetable left behind by the gods. In India, the Upanishads and Vedas speak of cosmic cycles of creation and destruction, cycles spanning millions of years. They describe epochs in which gods and humans interacted freely, followed by epochs in which the divine presence faded. The idea of yugas, ages of rising and declining knowledge, mirrors the Sumerian and Egyptian belief that history moves through recurring phases. These phases are not arbitrary. They follow celestial rhythms, governed by the movement of stars and planets. And according to the Indian sages, humanity is currently in the Kali Yuga, a dark age marked by confusion, materialism, and spiritual amnesia. Whether or not you take these cycles literally, the message is clear. Ancient people believed that the world operates according to vast, cosmic patterns far beyond human control. What ties all these traditions together is the idea that knowledge is cyclical. It rises, it falls, it is preserved by the few, and it is forgotten by the many. This concept explains why advanced ideas appear suddenly in the ancient world, like bursts of memory from an earlier age. It also explains why, as civilizations declined, their successors struggled to understand the structures and symbols left behind. The Great Pyramid, for example, was already ancient when the Greeks visited Egypt. They marveled at its precision, yet they could not decipher its purpose. Some believed it was a tomb. Others believed it was a monument to lost knowledge. In truth, it may have been neither. It may have been a relic of a time when humanity understood geometry, astronomy, and energy in ways we no longer do. One of the most intriguing examples of this hidden knowledge is the concept of sacred architecture. Across the ancient world, temples and monuments were built according to precise mathematical ratios believed to reflect the structure of the cosmos. The Egyptians used proportions based on the golden ratio. The Greeks adopted and refined these ideas, embedding them in their temples. In India, temple complexes were designed according to mandalas, geometric diagrams representing the universe. In Mesoamerica, the Maya aligned their pyramids with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles. These architectural choices were not aesthetic. They were symbolic expressions of a deeper truth, that the world itself is a reflection of cosmic order, and that sacred structures could act as bridges between the human realm and the divine. This idea, that certain geometries hold power, is not unique to any one culture. In fact, it appears to have been a universal belief in the ancient world, inherited from the same forgotten source. When you examine the mandalas of India, the ziggurats of Sumer, the pyramids of Egypt, the stone circles of Europe, and the geometric city layouts of Mesoamerica, you find the same underlying principles: orientation to cardinal directions, alignment with celestial events, and proportions based on sacred numbers. These numbers, 3, 4, 7, 12, 72, 108, 360, are recurring keys in ancient mathematics. They appear in myths, in rituals, in architecture, and even in the structure of religious calendars. Their frequency suggests that they were part of a shared knowledge system spanning continents. Take the number 72, for example. It appears in Sumerian king lists, Egyptian myths, Greek cosmologies, and Hindu astronomical cycles. Modern astronomers know that Earth's axis shifts 1 degree every 72 years, a phenomenon called precession. How did the ancients know this without telescopes? Either they inherited the knowledge from a pre-flood civilization, or they were taught by beings who possessed far superior astronomical understanding. Both possibilities lead back to the forgotten age. Another recurring number is 108, sacred in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It appears in the spacing of stone pillars at Angkor Wat, in the number of beads on prayer malas, and in calculations related to the sun and moon. If you divide the distance from Earth to the sun by the sun's diameter, the ratio is approximately 108. The same is true for the moon. Did ancient people calculate this, or did they inherit it? Again, the evidence suggests the latter. This leads to a larger question. Were ancient structures built merely as monuments, or were they part of a global energy system? Some researchers believe the pyramids, obelisks, and megalithic sites acted as nodes in a planetary grid, a system that harnessed telluric currents, solar alignments, and resonant frequencies. If this is true, it would mean the ancients had a working knowledge of Earth's electromagnetic field. While mainstream scholars scoff at this idea, it aligns with the concept of sacred geography found in nearly every ancient culture. The Chinese practice of feng shui, for instance, is based on the idea that energy flows through the landscape, influenced by mountains, rivers, and the orientation of structures. The Egyptians placed temples along the Nile according to patterns they believed mirrored the heavens. The Druids built stone circles at sites with unusual magnetic properties. These practices suggest a level of environmental awareness that modern society is only beginning to rediscover. All of this knowledge, however, came with a cost. As civilizations grew more complex, the guardians of this knowledge became more protective. In Egypt, the priesthood held immense power, controlling access to the sacred mysteries. In Sumer, the temple complexes were not just religious centers, they were economic and scientific hubs. In Greece, the Pythagorean Brotherhood guarded mathematical secrets that influenced Western philosophy for centuries. In India, the rishis passed down Vedic knowledge through oral tradition to preserve its purity. Everywhere, the deeper truths of the cosmos were guarded, restricted, and sometimes weaponized. This secrecy created a divide in ancient society, a divide between those who knew and those who obeyed. The priests, kings, and scholars who controlled the knowledge wielded immense influence over the masses. And as time passed, this imbalance became a source of tension. Religious systems emerged to justify the hierarchy. Rituals became performances for the public, while the true meanings were reserved for initiates. In some cases, the knowledge became so fragmented that even the priests no longer understood what they were guarding. They preserved symbols without knowing their origins, repeated rituals without understanding their functions, and recited hymns whose cosmic implications were long forgotten. This erosion of meaning reached its peak during periods of conquest. When foreign empires invaded ancient lands, they destroyed temples, burned libraries, and executed priests. With each conquest, another layer of the forgotten age disappeared. The Library of Alexandria, one of the greatest repositories of ancient knowledge, was burned multiple times, its contents lost forever. In Mesopotamia, countless clay tablets were reduced to dust during wars. In the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa vanished, their scripts undeciphered. In the Americas, conquistadors eradicated entire codices, leaving only fragments of Maya knowledge behind. Yet even as the flames consumed the monuments of the ancient world, the memories persisted in hidden places. Secret societies arose to protect what remained. In Egypt, the Hermetic tradition flourished, preserving echoes of Thoth's teachings. In Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries initiated select individuals into the secrets of life and death. In the Middle East, the Essenes kept alive the ancient teachings found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In India, the yogic traditions encoded cosmic truths in metaphors of chakras and kundalini. These groups became vessels for the remnants of the forgotten age, a network of hidden knowledge stretching across continents and centuries. As the millennia passed, the distance between humanity and its divine origins grew wider. Science and religion diverged. Myth was relegated to children's stories. Technology was reimagined as magic. And the beings who once guided early civilizations, the gods, the Watchers, the Anunnaki, became characters in fables. But beneath the surface, the symbols remained. The architecture remained. The star alignments remained. The sacred numbers remained. And the sense that something extraordinary once walked this earth remained, passed down through the collective subconscious of the human species. Today, as we uncover more of the ancient world through archaeology, satellite imagery, and linguistic reconstruction, the pieces begin to realign. Megalithic structures reveal patterns invisible from the ground. Newly discovered sites push the timeline of civilization further back. Forgotten texts resurface, offering glimpses into a world that was far more advanced than previously imagined. And slowly, we begin to see the outlines of the forgotten age. The age when gods walked among humans, when knowledge flowed freely, when the world was shaped according to celestial design. The ancient people were not wrong. They were not primitive. They were survivors of a cycle older than history. And through their myths, symbols, and structures, they left behind a message for future generations that humanity is part of a cosmic story, a story that stretches far beyond the limits of recorded history. And as we peel back the layers of time, we are beginning to remember what we once knew, what we once saw, and what we once were. There comes a point in the story of the ancient world where myth begins to feel less like imagination and more like memory, distorted, fragmented, and reshaped by time, yet still anchored in something real as we follow the threads woven through Sumerian tablets, Egyptian temple carvings, Vedic hymns, Mesoamerican codices, and the oral traditions of tribes across every continent. A strange clarity emerges. It is as though humanity has been struggling for millennia to recall an era when the boundaries between mortal and divine, between physical and celestial, were porous. A time when beings of immense knowledge walked among early humans, guiding them, manipulating them, and ultimately shaping the trajectory of civilization itself. But if the earlier parts of this hidden history focus on divine presence, the next chapter focuses on divine absence, on what happened when the gods withdrew, and humanity was left to navigate a world still haunted by their legacy. The transition between epochs was not instantaneous. It happened slowly, unevenly, like the sun setting across different landscapes at different times. Some regions felt the retreat of divine influence sooner than others. In Egypt, the gods were said to have ruled directly for thousands of years before withdrawing to the celestial realms, leaving behind pharaohs as their representatives. In Sumer, the Anunnaki gradually withdrew into temples and high places, appearing less frequently as humanity grew more populous and ambitious. In India, the Devas interacted openly with sages during the early Vedic period, but later retreated to subtle planes of existence. In Greece, the Titans and Olympians faded into myth long before the classical era. Across the world, the pattern remained. The gods stepped back, and humanity stepped forward, carrying with it only fragments of the knowledge that had once flowed freely. But withdrawal doesn't mean disappearance. The ancient texts are clear. The gods left intentionally, not accidentally. They departed because the world after the flood was no longer stable for direct interaction. The hybridization that once blurred the boundaries between species was forbidden. The celestial laws had changed. Whether these laws were cosmic, moral, or biological is unclear, but the result was the same. The gods would no longer walk among humans in physical form. Their guidance would come indirectly through dreams, visions, prophets, or the occasional chosen individual. And because the memories of their presence were still vivid, humanity spent centuries grappling with the question of how to interpret the silent sky. This period of transition gave birth to a new phenomenon that would shape the rest of human history: the rise of religion. Not religion in the modern sense, but religion as a system of encoded memory, a way to preserve the truths of the forgotten age without fully understanding them. Consider how early civilizations described their gods: luminous beings descending in radiant ships, wielding weapons of thunder, possessing technologies indistinguishable from magic. As the generations passed and direct encounters faded, these descriptions transformed into metaphors. The boats of heaven became chariots of fire. The tablets of destiny became commandments. The glowing beings who once guided humanity became angels, saints, or spirits. What had once been literal became symbolic. But symbols can be powerful, especially when the truths they hide are profound. And it is within these symbols that the next great stage of ancient history unfolded, a stage defined by the struggle to preserve, conceal, or reinterpret the knowledge of the gods. The first group to take on this role in a systematic way was the priesthood. In nearly every ancient civilization, priests became the primary intermediaries between humanity and the divine. They guarded the temples, conducted rituals, maintained sacred calendars, and interpreted the will of the gods, but their power extended far beyond spiritual duties. They were astronomers, mathematicians, healers, and historians. They were the custodians of knowledge that the gods had once shared openly. And because this knowledge was too complex for the general population, it became cloaked in mystery. Take Egypt, for example. The priesthood of Heliopolis possessed a creation doctrine so intricate and abstract that it took Greek philosophers centuries to decipher fragments of it. They understood the principles of sacred geometry, the movements of the stars, and the symbolic language of myth. They knew the Great Pyramid was aligned with Orion's belt for a reason. They knew why temples were oriented along specific axes. They knew that numbers held metaphysical significance. But much of this knowledge became increasingly esoteric over time, guarded by initiates and hidden from kings, let alone the public. The same process unfolded in Mesopotamia. The scribes of Babylon were not merely record keepers. They were guardians of astronomical tables, prophetic texts, and ritual instructions believed to have been handed down by the gods. Their knowledge shaped everything from agriculture to warfare. But they guarded this knowledge jealously, aware that power and secrecy were intimately linked. In India, the rishis preserved cosmic truths through oral tradition. For centuries, these teachings were restricted to specific castes and lineages. The Vedic hymns, which describe interactions with divine beings and cosmic cycles spanning millions of years, were chanted in secret, their meanings known only to initiates. Much of this knowledge eventually became metaphoric, reduced to philosophical poetry. But traces of its original intent remain, encoded in symbols like the lotus, the chakra, the third eye, and the serpent. In Greece, the mysteries, Eleusinian, Orphic, Dionysian, served as gateways into deeper knowledge. Initiates underwent ritual death and rebirth, symbolic of the cosmic cycles preserved from the forgotten age. These ceremonies were not mere theatrics. They were transformative experiences engineered to transmit glimpses of truths too profound to articulate. As the priesthoods of the ancient world solidified their power, another phenomenon emerged: the creation of divine law. Everywhere, the knowledge passed down by the gods became institutionalized into moral codes, legal systems, and religious doctrines. The Sumerian code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest known legal code, attributes its authority to the gods. The Egyptian concept of ma'at, truth, justice, cosmic balance, was not a philosophical invention but a divine principle governed by the gods themselves. The Ten Commandments, according to tradition, were handed down by a divine presence on a mountaintop shrouded in fire and smoke, a scene that reads like a technological encounter viewed through mythic eyes. Even kingship became ritualized within this framework. Early kings were not merely political rulers. They were seen as embodiments of divine order. In Egypt, the pharaoh was Horus incarnate. In Mesopotamia, the king was chosen by the gods to maintain cosmic balance. In India, the king was Dharma's guardian. In China, the emperor ruled under the mandate of heaven. All these ideas reflect the same deeper truth. Kingship originated as an extension of divine authority. The king was a proxy for the gods, a mortal echo of celestial rule. But power built on divine connection is fragile, and as the gods withdrew further into the realm of myth, the structures built on that connection began to crack. Priests disagreed about interpretations. Kings challenged religious authority. Empires rose and fell. Wars erupted over competing visions of the divine. And slowly, humanity's memory of the forgotten age splintered into thousands of competing narratives. During this period of spiritual confusion, a new type of figure emerged, one who claimed direct contact with the divine despite the gods' withdrawal. Prophets, seers, shamans, and mystics began to bridge the gap between the physical and celestial worlds through visions, dreams, and altered states of consciousness. Their revelations often clashed with the established priesthoods, sparking revolutions of belief. Consider Zoroaster in ancient Persia, whose teachings introduced the idea of a cosmic dualism. A battle between truth and falsehood echoed in later Abrahamic faiths. Consider Moses, whose encounters with a divine presence on Mount Sinai reshaped the religious landscape of the Middle East. Consider the Vedic sages, who described states of consciousness that brought them into contact with beings of light. Consider the Maya daykeepers, who interpreted cosmic cycles with incredible precision. These figures represent attempts to reconnect with the divine source after the gods stepped back. But not all attempts were successful. Some led to cults that spiraled into violence. Others led to schisms that divided civilizations. The withdrawal of the gods created a spiritual vacuum, and humans filled that vacuum with competing interpretations, some profound, others misguided. This period also saw the emergence of esoteric schools, groups dedicated to preserving the deeper truths hidden beneath religious symbolism. The Pythagoreans in Greece explored the mystical nature of numbers. The Druids in Europe maintained sacred knowledge about astronomy and the natural world. The Magi in Persia practiced rituals inherited from the forgotten age. The Qumran community in Judea recorded visions of angels and cosmic battles in texts now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These groups represent the surviving threads of ancient wisdom, woven into the fabric of later civilizations. Yet even as esoteric schools thrived in secret, the world around them changed rapidly. The rise of empires, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, brought massive cultural shifts. Libraries were burned, temples were desecrated. Knowledge that had survived the flood was lost once again to war, conquest, and fanaticism. The forgotten age slipped further into darkness. But not all was lost. Certain symbols survived across cultures, hinting at their shared origin. The winged sun disk, found in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and even Mesoamerica, represents a celestial presence descending upon Earth. The serpent, both feared and revered, symbolizes wisdom, renewal, and hidden knowledge. The Tree of Life appears in Sumerian carvings, Norse mythology, Hindu cosmology, and Kabbalistic tradition, representing the structure of the cosmos as taught by ancient sages. The flood myth appears everywhere, a universal memory of a real event. These symbols are more than artistic motifs. They are the mnemonic devices of the ancient world, tools used to preserve knowledge across time. As the classical era dawned, philosophers attempted to interpret these symbols rationally. Plato spoke of Atlantis and the divine origins of human knowledge. Pythagoras described the harmony of the spheres. Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretic figure blending Egyptian and Greek wisdom, wrote of a hidden truth accessible only to the purified mind. These thinkers represent a bridge between ancient cosmology and early scientific thought. But even they were working with fragments. The deeper truths, the ones known by the gods and the sages of the forgotten age, remained elusive. And yet traces of these truths continued to appear in unexpected places. In the architecture of the Parthenon, grounded in sacred ratios. In the Hebrew Kabbalah, with its 10 emanations mirroring ancient cosmology. In the teachings of the Buddha, who spoke of worlds beyond human perception. In Gnostic texts, which describe divine beings shaping humanity. In alchemical manuscripts, which encode cosmic principles in the language of transformation. All of these traditions point to an unsettling conclusion, that the philosophical and spiritual systems of the ancient world were not independent inventions, but reflections of a shared memory, echoes of a world shaped by beings who understood the cosmos far better than humanity ever has. And as the ancient world transitioned into the medieval era, even more knowledge was lost. Rome fell, libraries burned, empires fragmented, Europe plunged into the Dark Ages. The scientific and philosophical achievements of Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia faded into obscurity. Yet even in this darkness, the ancient symbols survived, embedded in cathedrals, mystic texts, and astronomical manuscripts copied by monks who did not fully understand what they preserved. Today, as researchers, explorers, and scholars piece together the remnants of the forgotten age, a new picture emerges, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about human history. The monuments of the ancient world align too precisely with the stars. The myths share too many details. The symbols recur too consistently. The astronomical knowledge is too advanced. The stories of gods walking among humans are too universal. This is not coincidence. This is memory. Collective memory of an age when humanity was not alone, when divine beings shaped the world, when knowledge flowed like a river from the heavens to the earth. And as more ruins are uncovered, more texts deciphered, and more connections made, the past begins to awaken. The forgotten age is no longer a myth. It is a hidden chapter waiting to be reclaimed. A chapter that reveals humanity's place in a vast cosmic narrative. We have forgotten who we were, but the earth remembers, and the stars remember. And slowly, so do we. By the time humanity crossed the threshold into what modern historians call the classical world, the ancient memory was no longer a clear narrative. It had become a spectral presence, half-whispered myths, fragments of stonework, symbols whose meanings had been hollowed out by time. Yet even as the gods withdrew into celestial silence, and the great sages of the forgotten age faded into legend, the shadow of their influence did not disappear. Instead, it slipped underground into hidden manuscripts, secret societies, prophetic visions, and the architecture itself, waiting for those with eyes to see. And as civilizations rose and fell, this buried inheritance shaped the world in ways few recognized, guiding humanity toward a destiny far stranger than any textbook version of history would dare suggest. To understand this stage of humanity's evolution, the era when the last embers of divine knowledge smoldered beneath the surface, you must look at the world not through the lens of kings and empires, but through the lens of symbols. Symbols became the vessels of truth. They carried ideas too dangerous, too sacred, or too complex to articulate plainly. And because symbols survive destruction better than libraries, they became the secret bridges between the forgotten age and the cultures that followed. One of the most enduring of these symbols is the serpent. Across the ancient world, the serpent appears as a dual figure, feared as a destroyer, revered as a teacher. In Sumer, Ningish Zaida, the god of the serpent, was a guide to the underworld and a keeper of forbidden knowledge. In Egypt, the serpent Mehen coiled around the sun god Ra to protect him during his nightly journey through the Duat. In India, the Naga were serpent deities who inhabited subterranean realms and possessed vast wisdom. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl brought knowledge of writing, astronomy, and agriculture. In Greece, the staff of Asclepius, a serpent wrapped around a rod, became a symbol of healing, a remnant of ancient medical teachings traced back to divine origins. These recurring serpent motifs are not coincidences. They represent the same idea: the transmission of knowledge from the divine to the human realm. The serpent is not merely an animal. It is a coded representation of the cosmic energy that connects worlds, the spiral of DNA, the Kundalini rising, the channel through which the ancient gods once spoke. When later religions cast the serpent as evil, they were not rejecting an animal. They were erasing a symbol of divine communication. Another primary symbol is the star. The eight-pointed star of Inanna, the star of Ishtar, the star of Venus, all represent celestial descent. The Dogon symbol of Sirius, the Egyptian star map in the ceiling of Dendera, the Mesopotamian depictions of the Anunnaki descending from a star gate. These images speak of something more literal than poetic. They point toward an ancient understanding that humanity was connected to the cosmos, not only spiritually, but physically. The gods were associated with specific stars because they came from specific stars, or at least from realms represented by those stars. In nearly every ancient society, the stars are not merely decorative backgrounds for myth. They are coordinates, calendars, messages, and this celestial awareness forms the foundation of what historians call ancient science, but what ancient people called the knowledge of the gods. As the classical world emerged, Greece, Rome, Persia, early China, the remnants of this knowledge filtered into philosophy. Plato, in his dialogues, recounts the tale of Atlantis, an advanced civilization destroyed by a catastrophic event because of moral decay, a thinly veiled echo of the flood. He speaks of a demiurge crafting the cosmos according to mathematical principles, a clear inheritance from Egyptian priests. His concept of the forms, perfect archetypes behind physical reality, mirrors ancient ideas of divine blueprints. Plato attributes much of his knowledge to the Egyptian priesthood, who told him that the Greeks were children compared to the ages humanity had lived and forgotten. His student Aristotle, though more grounded, preserved ancient biological and cosmological ideas handed down through pre-Socratic thinkers influenced by Eastern traditions. The Orphic mysteries, which predate classical Greece, describe a cosmic egg, a symbol found in Egypt, India, and the Dogon cosmology of Mali. This is no coincidence. It is a transmission. Even in Rome, the Vestal Virgins guarded sacred fires believed to contain cosmic knowledge. The Sibylline books, prophetic texts consulted by Roman leaders, were said to contain warnings about cycles of destruction and renewal reminiscent of Sumerian and Vedic ages. These texts, fragments of which survived until late antiquity, are rumored to have contained astronomical and metaphysical knowledge preserved from the forgotten age. But while philosophy attempted to interpret the remnants of divine wisdom, architecture preserved it physically. Look at the Parthenon in Greece. Its dimensions follow sacred ratios found in the pyramids of Egypt. Its columns mirror cosmic harmonics. Its placement aligns with celestial phenomena that only make sense when viewed through ancient star maps. In Rome, the Pantheon features a dome representing the heavens, with an oculus acting as a bridge between the human and divine realms. The structure is an echo of older cosmological temples built in the Forgotten Age. In China, ancient astronomical observatories align with constellations connected to mythological beings who descended to Earth. In India, the architecture of Angkor, though later in origin, encodes ancient cosmological principles that mirror Vedic knowledge inherited from the Forgotten Age. In the Americas, Teotihuacan's layout aligns with Orion's belt, echoing the Egyptian alignment, a connection too precise to be accidental. These architectural choices show a remarkable fact. Ancient civilizations across the world were attempting to recreate something. They were trying to rebuild a cosmic order once established by divine beings. They were following blueprints whose origins they only partially understood. This reconstruction did not occur in isolation. It was guided by a new type of figure that emerged across cultures during this period, one that inherited the role once played by the sages of the Forgotten Age. These were the philosophers, prophets, mystics, and initiates who understood the world through symbols rather than direct contact with the gods. Some of these figures left profound legacies. Pythagoras claimed to have traveled to Egypt and Babylon, learning from priests who preserved ancient wisdom. His teachings on harmony, geometry, and the soul echo ancient cosmology. His emphasis on number as the foundation of reality reflects Sumerian and Egyptian metaphysics. Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretic figure combining Thoth and Greek philosophical thought, became the central figure of Hermeticism. The Hermetic texts describe the universe as a layered structure, with humans capable of ascending through knowledge and purification. They describe divine beings shaping the world. They speak of cycles of destruction and rebirth. They preserve fragments of pre-flood wisdom in allegorical form. In Judeo-Christian tradition, the figure of Enoch becomes a bridge between human and divine. His ascent into heaven, his visions of cosmic realms, his interactions with angelic beings, these stories preserve the memory of the Watchers and the forbidden knowledge that once flowed freely. Though the Book of Enoch was suppressed by later religious authorities, its contents resurfaced in Ethiopia, revealing astonishing parallels to Sumerian and Egyptian accounts. In the Far East, Laozi and Zhuangzi articulated ideas about the Tao, an invisible force underlying reality. These teachings echo the ancient belief in a cosmic energy connecting all things, similar to the Egyptian concept of Ma'at, the Vedic idea of Urta, and the Sumerian concept of Mi. The Taoist immortals resemble the sages of the Forgotten Age, wandering between worlds, appearing and disappearing, embodying divine presence in human form. This era, marked by the fusion of philosophy, religion, astronomy, and architecture, was humanity's last great attempt to preserve the memory of the gods before it faded entirely. And yet, even as these traditions flourished, something else was stirring. A more subtle, shadowy current began to rise, a current shaped not by divine influence, but by human ambition. With the gods absent, humanity's rulers realized that power no longer required divine presence. It only required divine symbolism, and so began the Age of Empire. The empires that rose during the classical world were unlike anything that came before. They were vast, organized, and ruthlessly efficient. They were built on bureaucratic systems, armies, and trade networks, rather than celestial intervention. Yet, beneath their political structures, they carried remnants of ancient cosmology. The Persian Empire claimed to rule according to Ahura Mazda's cosmic law. The Mauryan Empire of India based its governance on Dharma, a principle inherited from Vedic cosmology. The Chinese dynasties saw themselves as the earthly reflection of celestial order. Even Rome, with its practical military machine, infused its political ideology with symbols drawn from earlier civilizations. But as empires expanded, they also destroyed. When Persia conquered Babylon, many ancient texts were lost. When Alexander the Great swept across the East, he absorbed knowledge but also erased cultures. When Rome conquered Greece, it inherited philosophical traditions but destroyed countless local mysteries. As civilizations collided, knowledge became fragmented, distorted, or forgotten. And yet, even in this chaos, a strange consistency remained. Everywhere empires rose, they built monuments aligned with cosmic principles. They recorded celestial events. They guarded mystical texts. They followed rituals whose origins they no longer understood. The divine memory persisted, even if distorted. Then, something changed. A subtle but decisive shift in the human psyche. The more humanity distanced itself from the forgotten age, the more literal it became. Myths became fixed dogma. Symbols became idols. Philosophies became rigid systems. The fluid, interconnected worldview of the ancient world hardened into competing doctrines. This shift is particularly visible in the rise of monotheistic religions. While deeply spiritual and often profound, these traditions simplified the ancient cosmologies into more linear, moral frameworks. They replaced celestial hierarchies with singular deities, recast ancient beings as angels or demons, and reframed mythic histories as moral narratives. The subtleties of the forgotten age were lost. The complexities of divine-human interaction became taboo. The memory of hybrid beings, cosmic visitors, and ancient sages was rewritten or erased. Yet beneath the surface, hints remained. The angels of the Hebrew Bible behave like the Watchers. They descend, speak, eat, and intervene. The descriptions of their fiery chariots resemble ancient accounts of celestial craft. The visions of prophets mirror the experiences of sages in earlier epochs. The very concept of covenant reflects an ancient tradition of divine-human agreements. Christianity, emerging from this tradition, preserved fragments of mystical teachings in its apocalyptic texts. The Book of Revelation reads like a symbolic retelling of cosmic battles described in Sumer and Ugarit. Christ's transfiguration, resurrection, and ascension echo the journeys of ancient divine messengers. Islam continued this inheritance. The Quran describes jinn, beings of fire who existed before humans. It speaks of angels who descend with messages. It describes hidden realms, cosmic battles, and cycles of destruction. It preserves stories of prophets who encountered beings from beyond the physical world. Even in the classical East, similar patterns endured. Buddhism describes bodhisattvas as beings who descend from celestial realms to guide humanity. Hinduism preserves detailed accounts of gods traveling in luminous craft, wielding weapons of immense power. Chinese mythology recounts dragons, beings of wisdom and energy, descending from the sky. All of these traditions, despite their vast differences, preserve the same core memory. that humanity was not alone, that divine beings once shaped the world, and that the withdrawal of the gods did not end the story. It merely changed the form. So what happened in the centuries that followed? Humanity entered an age of expansion, an age where the remnants of the forgotten age became the seeds of new knowledge. Greek philosophy laid the foundation for science. Indian metaphysics inspired spiritual systems. Egyptian geometry shaped architecture. Babylonian astronomy influenced calendars. Hebrew mysticism formed the basis of Western esotericism. Chinese cosmology shaped governance and medicine. Mesoamerican calendrical systems tracked cosmic cycles with stunning accuracy. Yet through all of this, the ancient truth remained hidden beneath layers of interpretation. The great sages were remembered as mythical figures. The gods became distant abstractions. The monuments were reimagined as tombs. The sacred numbers became mathematical curiosities. The star alignments were dismissed as coincidences. The forgotten age slipped into the background of human consciousness, a ghost haunting the edges of mythology, archaeology, and spirituality. But memory has a way of resurfacing. In the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, we find architecture far older than expected, with carvings depicting celestial events. In the pyramid texts, we find references to beings who traveled the sky. In Sumerian tablets, we find lists of kings who ruled for thousands of years. In Indian epics, we find descriptions of aerial battles. In the Dogon lore, we find knowledge of stars invisible to the naked eye. In the Americas, we find cities aligned to constellations. These are not isolated anomalies. They are clues. They suggest that humanity is beginning to recover the story it once lost. The classical world preserved fragments of the truth, wrapped in philosophy, ritual, and myth. And as modern discoveries bring these fragments together, a new picture emerges, one that challenges the very foundations of history. The ancient world was not primitive. The classical world was not the beginning. Humanity is far older, far stranger, and far more connected to the cosmos than we ever imagined. And the story of the gods is not over. It is merely waiting. By the time humanity crossed into the first millennium of what we now consider recorded history, the ancient world had already undergone a transformation so profound that few recognized its deeper implications. What had once been a living memory of gods, sages, and hybrid beings had decayed into a collection of myths, half-remembered rituals, and symbols preserved by cultures that no longer fully understood them. The forgotten age had become a ghost story whispered beneath the surface of civilization, a story encoded in temples, monuments, sacred texts, and star maps, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. But the memory did not disappear. It crystallized into something new, a hidden lineage of knowledge that would shape human history through secret orders, mystical traditions, and prophetic visions. And as humanity moved deeper into the classical and medieval eras, this lineage branched into unfamiliar forms, weaving itself into the cultural DNA of countless societies. This is the era in which humanity, sensing its separation from the gods, began to seek ways to reconnect. The old pathways, the direct voice of divine beings, the presence of celestial teachers were fading. But the hunger for transcendence remained. It manifested in alchemy, in mysticism, in secret brotherhoods and spiritual movements, each attempting to recover fragments of a truth humanity had nearly forgotten. Alchemy, one of the earliest of these threads, is perhaps the most misunderstood. In modern eyes, it is reduced to a crude precursor of chemistry, obsessed with turning lead into gold. But to the ancients, alchemy was never about physical transmutation. It was a symbolic language, a spiritual technology, preserved from the forgotten age. The alchemists believed that the material world reflected cosmic truths, and that by understanding matter, one could understand the divine. Their work was not about metals, but about consciousness. The philosopher's stone, often interpreted literally, was actually a metaphor for the inner spark that once connected humans directly to the gods. It represented the lost bridge between mortal and celestial, the remnant of a forgotten lineage of wisdom. This symbolic tradition was not limited to alchemy. In the Middle East, the Gnostics preserved an even more direct link to the forgotten age. Their texts describe a universe filled with layers of reality, ruled by beings of light and shadow. They speak of a divine spark trapped within humans, a spark that originated from the celestial beings who shaped humanity. The Gnostic worldview is not the invention of a mystical sect. It is a continuation of the ancient idea that humans are hybrids of physical and divine essence, and that enlightenment means remembering that origin. Gnostic texts like the Nag Hammadi scriptures reveal cosmologies startlingly similar to earlier Sumerian and Egyptian beliefs. They describe beings of immense power who created the physical world, conflicts among divine entities, and attempts to suppress human knowledge. These themes echo the ancient stories of the Watchers, the Anunnaki, and the forbidden unions that led to the flood. And though the Gnostics were persecuted into near extinction, their writings, buried in jars, forgotten in desert caves, resurfaced centuries later, offering us a window into a world view that once stretched across continents. Meanwhile, in Persia, Zoroastrianism emerged with a cosmology steeped in dualism, describing a universe in which forces of light and darkness battle for supremacy. Though often seen as theological, this dualism echoes an older struggle among the gods, conflicts recorded on clay tablets and temple walls. Zoroaster's teachings about a coming savior who will restore cosmic order reflect ancient prophecies about the return of the celestial beings, a recurring theme in nearly every spiritual tradition that followed. In India, the Upanishads deepened the Vedic worldview, describing a universe of layered realities accessible through meditation, discipline, and wisdom. The rishis who composed these texts claimed to experience direct communion with cosmic beings, experiences that mirror the visions described by Enoch, Moses, and other ancient prophets. The concept of Brahman, the underlying unity behind all things, resonates with the ancient belief in a cosmic energy that flows between dimensions. In China, Taoism emerged as a philosophy rooted in harmony with the cosmic flow. Its sages described immortals, beings who had transcended the physical world, much like the divine teachers of the forgotten age. Taoist texts speak of journeys through celestial realms and interactions with luminous beings. The concept of qi, the life force, echoes ancient Egyptian and Indian ideas about the subtle energies that once connected humans to celestial beings. Everywhere you look, the classical and medieval worlds inherited and reinterpreted the symbols of the forgotten age. But there is a moment, a turning point, when these symbols were no longer interpreted through the lens of memory, but through the lens of desire. Humanity longed to reclaim what it had lost, and this longing created new movements, movements that sought to reconnect with the divine, not through worship alone, but through knowledge. One of the most fascinating expressions of this longing is found in the Hermetic tradition. The Hermetic texts, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes, form the backbone of Western esotericism. These writings describe the structure of the cosmos, the nature of divine beings, and the role of humanity as a bridge between worlds. They speak of hidden knowledge preserved through the ages, guarded by initiates who understand that truth cannot be taught publicly. The Hermetic worldview is a direct descendant of the ancient knowledge systems. It teaches that the universe is a living organism, governed by principles reflected in the human mind. It asserts that the gods did not disappear when they withdrew. They became the archetypal forces that shape reality. And it describes a path of enlightenment that mirrors the journey of the ancient sages: purification, knowledge, ascent. Hermeticism influenced countless movements: Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, Sufism, the Renaissance magicians, the alchemists, and eventually modern occult societies. Each of these traditions carried a spark of the forgotten age, an ember from the cosmic fire that once burned brightly across the ancient world. But while these spiritual and philosophical movements preserved fragments of ancient truth, another force began to take shape, one that would transform human history in ways far more tangible. This was the rise of scientific inquiry. Contrary to popular belief, science did not emerge as a rejection of the ancient worldview. It emerged from it. The earliest scientists were mystics, philosophers, and priests. They saw no contradiction between studying nature and seeking the divine. In their eyes, the laws of physics were expressions of cosmic order. Mathematics was the language of creation. Astronomy was the study of celestial beings. The boundary between science and spirituality did not exist. Consider the Pythagoreans, whose mathematical discoveries were inspired by mystical visions of harmony. Consider the early Islamic scholars, who preserved and expanded the knowledge of the Greeks, Egyptians, and Babylonians. Their advancements in astronomy, algebra, and optics were grounded in the belief that understanding the universe meant understanding the mind of God. Consider the medieval Christian mystics, who saw numbers and geometry as divine signatures. But perhaps the most significant figure in this transition was Isaac Newton. Often hailed as the father of modern science, Newton spent more time studying alchemy and biblical prophecy than he did writing equations. His scientific discoveries were inseparable from his belief that the universe was created according to sacred principles. He sought the philosopher's stone not to turn lead into gold, but to unlock the secrets of the cosmos. He saw gravity, light, and motion as manifestations of divine order. This blending of science and mysticism reveals something profound. Humanity was still trying to remember the forgotten age. Even as empirical thinking grew stronger, the ancient symbols remained embedded in the collective unconscious, guiding research and inspiring breakthroughs. But as science advanced, a new problem emerged. The more humans understood the physical world, the more they believed they no longer needed the divine. Science became mechanistic. Spirituality became compartmentalized. The ancient synthesis fractured. Yet the symbols remained. And in the Middle Ages, when much of Europe lay in intellectual darkness, these symbols found refuge in places where few expected. Monasteries copied manuscripts filled with alchemical symbols and celestial maps. Cathedrals were built according to sacred geometry. Stonemasons embedded esoteric knowledge into architecture. Knights Templar traveled to the Holy Land and returned with secrets that would influence Europe for centuries. The Kabbalists developed mystical diagrams reflecting ancient cosmology. Islamic scholars preserved Greek and Egyptian texts long after they vanished in the West. These movements created the foundation for the Renaissance, an explosive rebirth of knowledge fueled by ancient symbolism. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci encoded sacred geometry into their paintings. Architects revived the proportions of the ancient world. Scholars translated lost texts. Philosophers rediscovered Platonic and Hermetic wisdom. Astronomers mapped the heavens with new precision. The Renaissance was not merely an intellectual awakening, it was a resurfacing of the forgotten age, filtered through medieval memory. But even as knowledge expanded, another force crept into the world: suppression. As empires, religions, and institutions consolidated power, they began to view ancient knowledge as dangerous. They burned books, outlawed mystical traditions, labeled ancient teachings as heresy, hunted those who pursued forbidden knowledge. The Inquisition destroyed countless esoteric texts. Islamic fundamentalists burned libraries. Chinese emperors banned Taoist practices. Indian invaders destroyed temples. Aztec codices were burned by conquistadors. Each destruction created another layer of forgetting. And yet, the memory of the forgotten age remained too resilient to erase. It survived in art, in architecture, in myths, in symbols. It survived in secret societies like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons. It survived in mystical traditions like Kabbalah and Sufism. It survived in indigenous cultures untouched by empire. It survived in the stories of watchers, sky beings, gods, and giants. Then came the Enlightenment. On the surface, the Enlightenment seemed like a triumph of reason over superstition. But beneath the surface, it was another turning point in humanity's relationship with the ancient memory. Rationality severed the world from the cosmos. Myth was dismissed as fantasy. Symbols were stripped of meaning. The ancient belief that humanity was connected to celestial beings was labeled primitive. The forgotten age receded even deeper into obscurity. But something strange happened. As science advanced, it began to echo the ancient worldview. Quantum physics described realms beyond ordinary perception. Cosmology revealed a universe structured by invisible forces. DNA showed that life follows patterns reminiscent of sacred geometry. Astronomy suggested that Earth is part of a cosmic ecosystem. The boundary between matter and energy dissolved. Consciousness became a mystery. Space-time bent, folded, expanded. And suddenly, the ancient ideas of layered realities, divine sparks, cosmic cycles, no longer seemed naive. Science, without realizing it, was rediscovering the truths the ancients encoded in myth. Yet even as modern knowledge advanced, the full story remained hidden. The symbols were still scattered. The monuments were still misunderstood. The texts were still fragmented. And the ancient memory, though resurfacing, remained incomplete. Humanity had forgotten its origin. It had forgotten the beings who shaped it. It had forgotten the purpose behind its existence. But the forgotten age was never truly lost. It was sleeping, waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to understand. And as the modern world began to unlock the secrets of the universe, the ancient memory stirred once more. like a giant turning beneath the earth, preparing to rise again. By the time humanity stepped into the era that would eventually give rise to the modern world, the forgotten age had become little more than a shadow, an echo suspended between mythology and memory. Yet beneath the surface of every culture, every religion, every scientific breakthrough, the remnants of that lost epoch continued to influence humanity in subtle and profound ways. The symbols were still there, hiding in plain sight. The monuments were still standing, defying explanation. The myths still whispered of skyborn teachers, fiery chariots, forbidden unions, and a great reset that wiped clean a world far older than anyone dared to admit. And as the medieval world slowly transformed into the age of exploration and discovery, the ancient story began to re-emerge, not through divine revelation, but through the curiosity of human seekers who sensed that the official version of history was incomplete. These seekers, travelers, scholars, monks, mystics, explorers, were often dismissed as dreamers. Yet many were driven by something deeper, an intuitive recognition that humanity had forgotten its origin. Some sought answers in ruins buried beneath jungles. Some searched the deserts for lost libraries. Others studied the stars, convinced that the heavens held clues to an ancient truth. And slowly, as the world expanded, a new kind of rediscovery began, one driven not by the gods, but by humans determined to reclaim what had been lost. The first major wave of rediscovery came through translation, as Arabic scholars preserved Greek and Egyptian knowledge, and as European travelers returned from the East with manuscripts. The Western world suddenly found itself confronted with ideas that did not fit into its narrow medieval worldview. Texts like the Corpus Hermeticum resurfaced, describing a cosmology in which divine beings shaped the universe. Plato's dialogues, long forgotten in Europe, were reintroduced, bringing with them the story of Atlantis. The Hebrew Kabbalah, once restricted to small circles of mystics, began to spread outward, offering a vision of reality composed of intersecting realms. The Vedas and Upanishads reached European scholars by the 18th century, revealing cosmic cycles that dwarfed biblical timelines. These texts did more than revive ancient philosophies. They awakened a forgotten intuition, the sense that humanity's past was deeper, stranger, and more interconnected than religious orthodoxy allowed. They ignited a hunger that would soon drive explorers to the edges of the earth. The age of exploration did not merely reveal new continents, it revealed new memories. When Spanish conquistadors reached the Americas, they encountered civilizations whose architecture rivaled Egypt and whose calendars rivaled Babylon. The Maya tracked the movements of Venus with breathtaking precision. The Aztec and Inca myths described gods descending from the sky, teaching agriculture, law, and astronomy, stories eerily similar to those told in Sumer, Egypt, and India. The feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, echoed the serpent gods of Asia and the Middle East. The Mesoamerican flood myths matched the Sumerian and biblical ones almost word for word. Yet instead of recognizing these parallels as evidence of a global ancient memory, the conquistadors destroyed the codices and temples, silencing voices that might have reshaped human understanding. But the monuments remained. The pyramids of Teotihuacan, aligned with Orion, the Nazca lines, visible only from the sky, the Olmec heads, carved with faces that resembled none of the local populations. These structures became silent ambassadors of a forgotten age. The more humanity explored, the more anomalies it found. In the Pacific, the Polynesians spoke of ancestral navigators who followed the stars with supernatural accuracy, skills inherited from sky beings. On Easter Island, the Moai gazed toward horizons tied to ancient celestial markers. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories described beings who descended from the sky to shape the land. In Africa, the Dogon tribe claimed knowledge of Sirius B long before telescopes existed. In Asia, Chinese legends spoke of dragons, celestial teachers who brought order to chaos. Everywhere, the myths converged. But even as explorers uncovered parallels, another force was rising, a force that would shape the next phase of humanity's rediscovery: the scientific revolution. Contrary to its portrayal in modern textbooks, the scientific revolution did not reject the ancient worldview. It unknowingly rediscovered it. Astronomy revealed that Earth was not the center of the universe, a truth known to Babylonian astronomers millennia earlier. Physics showed that invisible forces shaped reality, echoing Vedic teachings about subtle energies. Biology uncovered the hidden patterns of life, patterns reminiscent of sacred geometry. Geology revealed that Earth had experienced catastrophic events, confirming flood myths. Anthropology showed that civilizations rose and fell repeatedly, supporting the ancient idea of cyclical ages. Yet science, in its infancy, dismissed the myths as primitive. It failed to see that the ancients were not describing fantasy. They were describing memory. As science grew more confident, it began to uncover truths the ancient world had long preserved symbolically. The discovery of deep time proved that Earth's history was far older than religious texts suggested. Excavations in Mesopotamia unearthed tablets older than the Bible. The unearthing of Troy proved that myth could be history. The deciphering of hieroglyphs revealed that the Egyptians described their gods as physical beings who walked among mortals. The translation of cuneiform texts exposed the Sumerian king list, which described rulers who reigned for thousands of years. These discoveries did not merely challenge existing beliefs. They cracked open a door that had been sealed for millennia. And with the door ajar, the world began to see the forgotten age not as myth, but as a lost chapter of human history. The 19th century marked a turning point, a period when archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics converged to reveal a past far stranger than expected. But it also marked the beginning of something darker: resistance. Institutions built on rigid narratives, religious, academic, political, viewed the emerging discoveries as threats. And so began the age of selective preservation, selective interpretation, and selective destruction. Archaeologists unearthed giant skeletons in North America, only for museums to quietly remove them. Stone tablets describing interactions with sky beings were labeled as symbolic rather than literal. Indigenous cosmologies were dismissed as myths despite their precision. Structures like Baalbek, built with stones weighing hundreds of tons, were assigned dates that ignored engineering impossibilities. Anything that resembled the forgotten age was pushed to the margins. Anything that hinted at pre-flood civilizations was suppressed. Anything that connected ancient myths to historical events was ridiculed. But the truth has a way of surviving. Even as academic institutions attempted to fit ancient discoveries into comfortable narratives, independent researchers, mystics, and explorers continued to build a different picture, one that aligned far more closely with the myths of the Forgotten Age. They recognized that similarities across cultures were not coincidences. They saw that monuments separated by oceans featured identical astronomical alignments. They noticed that flood stories existed everywhere. They understood that stories of sky beings, giants, and hybrid lineages were too universal to dismiss. They realized that humanity had experienced a rupture, a cataclysm that erased a world far older than recorded history, leaving behind only fragments. This realization sparked a new phase of rediscovery, one guided not by empires or institutions, but by individuals who sensed that the Earth itself was holding secrets too important to ignore. The 20th century accelerated this rediscovery. Aviation allowed humans to see ancient structures from the sky, revealing patterns invisible from the ground. Satellites exposed lost cities in jungles and deserts. Sonar revealed structures beneath the oceans. LIDAR uncovered vast ancient road networks. Radiocarbon dating pushed the timeline of civilization back thousands of years. New translations of ancient texts revealed descriptions of star visitors, luminous beings, and cosmic wars. Yet despite these discoveries, the dominant narrative remained conservative. Historians insisted that civilization began around 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists dismissed anomalies as outliers. Scientists avoided any interpretation that resembled the Forgotten Age. But the cracks in the narrative widened. Göbekli Tepe shattered the old timeline, revealing megalithic architecture 11,000 years old, older than agriculture, older than writing, older than any known civilization. The site seemed deliberately buried, as if to preserve it from a cataclysm. Its carvings depicted animals, celestial symbols, and a comet impact, hinting at a forgotten cosmic disaster. And its creators worked with a sophistication far beyond what hunter-gatherers should have possessed. Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of civilization. It was the remnant of something older. Other discoveries followed. Ancient maps showed Antarctica without ice. Underwater ruins near India dated back to the Younger Dryas. Pyramids appeared in Bosnia, Indonesia, China. Ancient astronomical knowledge proved far more advanced than expected. The world began to look less like a linear progression and more like a cycle. And cycles, as ancient texts remind us, are the heartbeat of the cosmos. The more researchers uncovered, the more the ancient concept of cyclical ages began to make sense. The Vedic concept of yugas, the Greek ages of man, the Sumerian worldview, all described cycles of rise, fall, and renewal. All described epochs in which the gods interacted with humans, followed by epochs of decline. All described destructions caused by cosmic events, and all warned of future cycles. This idea, once dismissed as mythology, began to resurface in modern science. Evidence of past cataclysms emerged from geology, comet impacts, solar storms, rapid climate shifts, magnetic reversals. The Younger Dryas event, once controversial, became accepted as a global catastrophe, possibly caused by fragments of a disintegrating comet. The ancient flood stories were not metaphors, they were memories. And suddenly, the Forgotten Age, the era of gods, sages, giants, hybrid beings, became plausible once more. Not as fantasy, but as history lost to cataclysm. Humanity began to awaken to the possibility that its origins were not confined to a few thousand years of recorded history, that the gods, whatever they truly were, once shaped the world, that ancient myths were encoded memories of real events, that monuments were designed as messages to the future, that ancient cosmology preserved knowledge of cycles far beyond human lifespan. Yet even as awareness grew, the full truth remained out of reach. Because the forgotten age was not merely erased by time, it was deliberately buried. Buried in myths, buried in symbols, buried beneath oceans and deserts, buried beneath layers of institutional denial, buried within humanity's own fear of understanding its true origin. And now, as modern discoveries converge with ancient memory, something extraordinary is happening. The forgotten age is no longer invisible. Its outlines are re-emerging on tablets, in ruins, in star patterns, in DNA, in geological strata. The story humanity forgot is remembering itself. Part 9 ends on the brink of revelation, where the past begins to merge with the present, and the ancient memory stirs once more, preparing to surface in full. There are moments in history when humanity stands unknowingly on the threshold of revelation. Moments when the past, long buried beneath sand, silt, and denial, rises like a shadow resurfacing from deep water. Today, we live in one of those moments. Not because we are more intelligent than the ancients, nor because our technology grants us superiority over those who carved monoliths with uncanny precision, but because the forgotten age has begun to reassemble itself in our collective awareness. And the deeper we investigate our origins, the more we realize that the line separating mythology from history is thin, permeable, designed to conceal truths too immense, too destabilizing to have survived unaltered through the ages. As we move into the final chapter of this journey, we must examine not only what humanity forgot, but why humanity forgot. And perhaps more importantly, why we are beginning to remember. Across the planet, patterns are emerging that defy conventional explanation. Ancient structures once thought symbolic are revealing measurable scientific purpose. Mythologies once dismissed as fantasy are aligning with geological, genetic, and astronomical evidence. Lost texts are resurfacing with narratives that mirror discoveries made thousands of miles away, and humanity, increasingly aware of its fractured origins, is beginning to ask questions that were once forbidden. Not quietly, not cautiously, but with a hunger sharpened by centuries of half-truths. The first great awakening of this era comes from archaeology. Not the archaeology taught in schools, but the archaeology reshaping our understanding of prehistory. Technologies like LiDAR, satellite imaging, and underwater scanning have revealed a world far more ancient and complex than previously imagined. Lost cities beneath the Amazon rainforest, impossible stonework beneath the waters of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean. Roads, canals, pyramids, and astronomical observatories hidden beneath jungles and deserts, untouched for millennia. These discoveries, once anomalies, are now forming a pattern that traces back to a civilization predating Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. A civilization capable of building with precision unmatched even today. A civilization with global presence. A civilization erased by catastrophe. Mainstream narratives avoid this conclusion. But the evidence, silent though it may be, does not. Even more astonishing is what we are discovering about human genetics. Modern studies reveal that humanity is far older and more diverse than previously thought. Lineages diverged long before the first civilizations appeared. Genetic bottlenecks hint at catastrophic events aligned with the younger Dryas. Mysterious ghost populations appear in the human genome, groups for which there is no archaeological trace. And ancient texts, from the Book of Enoch to the Sumerian tablets, describe unions between humans and beings of heaven, resulting in hybrid bloodlines erased by divine decree. What if these stories were not metaphors? What if they were memories? This leads us into the realm of astronomy, where perhaps the most profound rediscoveries are taking place. Star alignments embedded in pyramids, temples, and megalithic circles reflect knowledge of precession spanning tens of thousands of years. Ancient star maps indicate awareness of celestial bodies invisible without modern telescopes. Catastrophic events, the Younger Dryas impact, solar flares, comet fragments, match global myths of a world destroyed by fire and water. The ancients warned of cycles, cosmic rhythms, and celestial resets. They spoke of ages dominated by light, followed by ages of darkness. They described the rise and fall of civilizations not as isolated events, but as recurring phases driven by forces beyond human control. And now, modern science is beginning to validate these cycles. Solar activity, magnetic field shifts, orbital mechanics, cosmic radiation, these elements influence climate, evolution, and even consciousness. The universe is not static. It pulses, breathes, resets. The Forgotten Age was not merely a time before history. It was the previous cycle. Humanity is not the first advanced species on Earth. It may not even be the first intelligent species. It is simply the latest. And just as ancient civilizations reached their zenith before being washed away by catastrophe, humanity now stands at a crossroads. Our technology, though advanced, mirrors patterns seen in ancient myths. Patterns of pride, hubris, and imbalance. The same warnings echo across cultures. Civilizations that forget their origins are doomed to repeat their downfall. Yet, unlike the ancients, we possess something they did not: global communication. Instant data sharing. A collective mind capable of reassembling the truth at unprecedented speed. This is why the Forgotten Age is returning now. This is why the symbols are reawakening. This is why the ruins are revealing their secrets. Humanity is being prepared, not by divine decree, but by the natural rhythms of memory. But there is another possibility, one that the ancients hinted at repeatedly. The gods promised to return. Every culture speaks of a future visitation, the return of the Shining Ones, the reappearance of the feathered serpent, the ascension of the rishis, the descent of the angels, the opening of the gates of heaven. What if these prophecies reflect more than spiritual metaphor? What if they are the coded memories of past cycles when celestial beings returned to guide or judge humanity? The Book of Enoch describes beings who will appear when humanity forgets the ancient laws. The Maya described a time when the sky gods would return at the end of a cosmic cycle. The Hopi speak of elder brothers returning when the world is out of balance. The Dogon say that their teachers will come back from Sirius. The Egyptians believed that Osiris would return when the stars aligned once more. Is it a coincidence that these prophecies align with astronomical cycles, or are they predictions? As we examine the modern world, our technological acceleration, our environmental instability, our global interconnectedness, it becomes difficult to ignore the parallels between ancient warnings and contemporary reality. Humanity is once again reaching a point where its creations outpace its wisdom, once again harnessing forces it does not fully understand, once again standing on the precipice of potential reset. The Forgotten Age, for all its glories and achievements, fell, its cities drowned, its monuments shattered, its bloodlines scattered, its knowledge obscured, and yet echoes of that world remain, echoes humanity is only now beginning to hear clearly. But this time, the story may end differently, because this time, humanity has the ability to understand the past before it repeats, to recognize the warnings encoded in myth, to decipher the alignments etched in stone, to interpret the catastrophic signatures in geological strata, to reconnect with the cosmic rhythms the ancients once knew, to reclaim the knowledge that once connected mortals and gods. Perhaps this is why the Forgotten Age is resurfacing, not as a nostalgic curiosity, but as a map, a guide, a warning. This final part does not end with a revelation. It ends with a suggestion. Quiet, unsettling, but impossible to ignore. What if humanity's next awakening is not merely about remembering the past, but about preparing for what comes after? Because the Forgotten Age was not the beginning, nor was it the climax. It was a chapter, a cycle, a turning of the cosmic wheel. And as the wheel turns once more, the question is no longer, what happened long ago? The question is, what happens next? The monuments are watching, the stars are aligning, and the ancient memory is rising, not to remind us where we came from, but to show us where we are going.